The helicopter's engine roared above the Afghan mountains as Commander Hartwell glanced at the handcuffed woman slumped against the cargo netting. Dead weight, he muttered to his co-pilot, Major Breck. Should have left her at base camp. The woman, Staff Sergeant Lydia Chun, kept her eyes closed, letting them believe she was unconscious from whatever they thought had happened during the firefight 3 hours earlier. Before we continue this story of hidden strength, drop a comment and let us know what state you're watching from. Maybe you've witnessed similar acts of courage in your military community. Breck adjusted his headset and peered back at their prisoner. What's the point of dragging her all the way out here just to dump her? The mission's compromised anyway. Chun felt the aircraft bank sharply left, her shoulder pressing harder against the cold metal wall. Through her partially closed eyelids, she watched the crew chief, Sergeant Torres, checking his watch impatiently. Hartwell's voice crackled through the comm system. Orders are orders. High command wants her gone. No questions asked. Apparently, she compromised the entire operation back at the compound. The way he emphasized the word apparently suggested even he wasn't entirely convinced of the official story. Chun shifted slightly, testing the zip tie restraints around her wrists. Standard issue, probably tensile strength around 300 pounds. Amateur hour. She'd been breaking out of better restraints since her second year at Bragg. The helicopter hit turbulence, and Torres grabbed a support handle, his knuckles white against the equipment rack. You sure about this altitude, Commander? Torres called over the engine noise. That's a hell of a drop, even with a chute. His eyes flicked nervously toward Chun, then back to Hartwell. Doesn't seem right. Throwing out someone who can't even defend herself. Hartwell turned in his seat, his expression hard. She had her chance to defend herself back at the compound, Sergeant. Instead, she went rogue and got half her team killed. Now she pays the price. His fingers drummed against his knee, a tell Chin had noticed during the pre-mission briefing. He was nervous, probably second-guessing orders he didn't fully understand. The aircraft climbed higher, and Chin felt the familiar sensation of reduced cabin pressure. 15,000 feet, maybe 16. Perfect altitude for what they had planned, though not for the reasons they thought. Breck was studying his instruments, occasionally glancing back at her with something that might have been guilt. Major Breck's voice was quieter now, meant only for Hartwell. Sir, her record shows 3 tours in Afghanistan, 2 Bronze Stars, and a Purple Heart. Seems like a waste to just... His words trailed off, but the implication hung in the recycled air between them. Hartwell's jaw tightened. Records can be fabricated, Major. What matters is what happened today. She compromised the mission, and now American lives are at risk because of her actions. His conviction sounded forced, like he was trying to convince himself as much as his crew. Chin opened her eyes fully for the first time since takeoff, letting them see she was conscious. The effect was immediate. Torres stepped back instinctively, his hand moving toward his sidearm. Breck turned completely around in his seat, studying her face with new interest. Well, Hartwell said, his tone shifting to something colder. Sleeping Beauty decides to join us. Hope you enjoyed your nap, Sergeant, because it's going to be your last. He stood and moved toward the cargo door, his hand resting on the release mechanism. Chin met his gaze steadily, her voice calm despite the engine noise. Commander Hartwell, she said, pronouncing each word clearly, you might want to reconsider your current course of action. The restraints around her wrists shifted slightly, a movement so subtle that only Torres, standing closest, might have noticed. The helicopter continued its climb toward the drop zone, unaware that the woman they intended to discard was calculating wind speed, air density, and landing trajectory with the precision of someone who had made this type of jump dozens of times before. Torres keyed his radio, his voice tight with uncertainty. Base control, this is Raven 7. Requesting confirmation on cargo disposal authorization. The static crackled back empty for several seconds before a voice responded with coordinates and clearance codes that made Hartwell nod grimly. Chun watched the crew chief's face, noting how his eyes kept returning to her restraints. Smart man, probably wondering why someone supposedly unconscious from combat trauma had managed to keep her wrist positioned to minimize circulation loss. Most prisoners panicked and pulled against zip ties until their hands went numb. She'd kept perfect positioning for the past 3 hours. Breck was studying his mission tablet, scrolling through what appeared to be personnel files. Sir, according to this, Staff Sergeant Chun completed airborne school at Fort Benning with a perfect jump record. 97 successful drops, including night operations and combat jumps. His finger traced the screen as he read. Why would someone with this background compromise a ground operation? Because people change, Major, Hartwell replied, but his tone had lost some of its earlier conviction. War does things to soldiers. Makes them crack under pressure, make bad decisions that get good people killed. He moved to check the cargo door mechanism, testing the release handle with practiced efficiency. Chun shifted her weight, allowing the handcuffs to catch the overhead lighting for just a moment. The brief metallic flash drew Torres' attention, and she saw him notice something that made his expression change. Standard restraints weren't designed to accommodate the specific hand positioning she was maintaining. Someone with her supposed level of training wouldn't naturally fall into that stance unless they'd been taught advanced escape techniques. The helicopter banked again, and through the small porthole window, Chun could see the rugged Afghan terrain passing below. 17,000 feet now, based on the engine sound and air pressure. They were approaching optimal altitude for what they planned, though still suboptimal for what she had in mind. Another 1,000 feet would be perfect. Commander, Torres said, his voice cutting through the engine noise, I've been running cargo drops for 8 years. Something doesn't add up here. He gestured toward Chun without looking directly at her. Most prisoners fight the restraints, try to negotiate, show some kind of fear. She's been calm since takeoff. Too calm. Hartwell turned sharply. Are you questioning our orders, Sergeant? Because if you have a problem following direct commands from High Command, we can discuss your fitness for duty when we return to base. His words carried the weight of military authority, but Torres held his ground. Not questioning orders, sir. Just observing tactical inconsistencies that might affect mission success. Torres' military bearing remained perfect, but his eyes flicked meaningfully toward Chen's hands. Someone taught her advanced restraint management. That's not standard infantry training. Breck was still scrolling through files, his frown deepening. Sir, there's something else here. Her psychological evaluations show exceptional stress management and decision-making under pressure. Last assessment noted, quote, demonstrates unusual calm in high-stress scenarios, suggesting advanced training beyond standard military protocols, end quote. Chen allowed herself a slight smile, knowing they would interpret it as resignation rather than anticipation. These men were professional soldiers, trained to notice details that didn't fit standard patterns. The longer they observed her, the more questions would arise about the official story they'd been given. The aircraft climbed higher, the engine note changing as they reached thinner air. 18,000 feet. Almost perfect altitude for a combat jump, though they planned to throw her out without equipment. What they didn't realize was that she'd made higher jumps with less preparation during training exercises they'd never heard of. Hartwell checked his watch, then moved to the cargo door controls. 5 minutes to drop zone. Whatever inconsistencies you think you're seeing, gentlemen, our orders are clear. This woman compromised Operation Desert Falcon, resulting in casualties that could have been prevented. Justice is being served. But even as he spoke, doubt crept into his voice. Chun could hear it, the slight hesitation that suggested he was beginning to question the narrative he'd been given. Professional soldiers developed instincts about deception, and something about this entire scenario felt wrong to men trained to trust their tactical assessment abilities. Torres stepped closer to Chun, ostensibly checking her restraints, but actually examining them more carefully. Ma'am, he said quietly, almost conversationally, you seem remarkably composed for someone about to be thrown from a helicopter. Most people would be screaming or begging by now. Chun looked up at him, her expression serene. Sergeant Torres, she said, her voice carrying clearly despite the engine noise. Have you ever heard the phrase, assumptions make poor tactical foundations? The way she said it, with the cadence of someone quoting military doctrine, made all three men pause. What the hell is that supposed to mean? Hartwell demanded, but uncertainty was creeping across his features. Too many details weren't adding up to the simple story of a rogue soldier they'd been told to dispose of. Breck's tablet chimed with an incoming message, and his face went pale as he read. "Commander, we have a problem. Base Control just sent updated intel on Operation Desert Falcon. According to this, the mission was compromised before our team ever reached the compound. Intelligence failure, not personnel failure." Hartwell's hand froze on the cargo door release. "What are you talking about, Major?" He moved away from the controls and snatched the tablet, his eyes scanning the encrypted message. The words pre-existing compromise and external intelligence leak stood out in the classified briefing update. Chun watched their faces carefully, noting how the new information was reshaping their understanding of the situation. Someone higher up the chain of command had made a serious miscalculation, and these three men were beginning to realize they might be carrying out an execution based on false information. Torres stepped between Chun and the cargo door, his positioning subtle but unmistakably protective. "Sir, if the mission was compromised before we arrived, then Staff Sergeant Chun couldn't have been responsible for the casualties." His voice carried the weight of someone who'd seen too many good soldiers blamed for command failures. "This doesn't make sense," Breck muttered, scrolling through additional files. "Look at this, Commander." Chen's unit was assigned as rear security, positioned 2 clicks from the primary objective. She wasn't even in the compound when the ambush occurred. How could she have compromised anything from that distance? Hartwell's jaw worked silently as he processed the implications. His orders had been explicit: dispose of the rogue soldier who cost American lives. But if she hadn't been in position to compromise the mission, then someone had fed him deliberately false information. The question was why. She decided it was time to provide some clarity. "Commander," she said, her voice cutting through their confusion, "perhaps you should ask yourself who benefits from my disappearance. 3 hours ago, I was the only witness to what really happened at that compound. Now, conveniently, I'm about to have a fatal parachuting accident with no equipment." The helicopter hit turbulence, and all 4 occupants swayed with emotion. Through the porthole, the Afghan landscape stretched endlessly below, unforgiving terrain that would make survival nearly impossible for anyone without proper training. Nearly impossible, but not completely impossible for someone with the right skills. Torres was studying Chun with new interest. "Ma'am, what exactly did you witness at the compound?" His question carried the authority of someone who'd earned his stripes through combat experience rather than desk assignments. Chun met his gaze steadily. "I saw Lieutenant Colonel Morrison receiving a briefcase from someone who definitely wasn't on our team roster. 5 minutes before the ambush started. Same Morrison who signed the orders for this little helicopter ride." Her words landed like artillery shells in a confined space. "That's impossible," Hartwell said, but his protest lacked conviction. Morrison was their liaison with higher command, the man who'd personally briefed him on Chen's supposed treachery. If she was telling the truth, then everything about this mission was built on lies. Breck was cross-referencing files on his tablet, his fingers moving rapidly across the screen. "Sir, Morrison's financial records show irregular deposits over the past 6 months. Large amounts, always from offshore accounts. This is starting to look like something way above our pay grade." The aircraft continued climbing, reaching 19,000 feet. Chun could feel the thin air affecting the crew's breathing, but her own respiration remained steady and controlled. High-altitude conditioning was part of specialized training that went far beyond standard infantry preparation. Torres checked his altimeter and frowned. "Commander, we're at operational ceiling for this aircraft. Much higher, and we risk equipment failure. If we're going to complete this mission, it has to be now." But his tone suggested he was hoping Hartwell would call off the drop entirely. Hartwell stared at the cargo door controls, his hand hovering over the release mechanism. Everything he'd been told about this mission was unraveling. Chun was supposed to be a broken soldier who'd compromised their operation through panic or cowardice. Instead, she appeared to be a potential witness to high-level corruption who'd been marked for elimination. Chun watched the internal struggle playing out on his face. "Commander," she said quietly, "you have a choice to make. You can follow orders based on false information and become an accessory to murder, or you can start asking the right questions about who really betrayed Operation Desert Falcon." The helicopter's engines shifted pitch as they reached maximum altitude. Outside, the sky was a deep blue that bordered on black, the thin atmosphere of extreme elevation. Perfect conditions for what Chun had been trained to do, though her captors still had no idea what that training entailed. Major Breck looked up from his tablet, his expression grim. "Commander, I just received another encrypted message. Morrison's been placed under investigation for treason. Effective immediately." Someone at command realized there was a problem, but apparently not before our orders were issued. 19,500 feet and climbing. Chun felt the familiar sensation of her body preparing for extreme altitude operations, training that had been drilled into her during programs these men didn't know existed. Soon, she would have to make her own choice about how this situation would end. The radio crackled to life with an urgent transmission. "Raven 7, this is base control. Abort current mission immediately. Repeat, abort disposal operation and return to base. New intelligence indicates target is critical witness in ongoing investigation." Hartwell grabbed his headset, his voice sharp with confusion. "Base control, confirm abort order. We are at drop altitude and prepared to execute as originally commanded." His eyes darted between Chun and his crew, uncertainty replacing his earlier resolve. "Negative abort, Raven 7. A different voice came through the static, one that made Hartwell straighten. "This is Colonel Morrison. Continue with original mission parameters. Previous transmission was sent by unauthorized personnel. Dispose of cargo as ordered." Torres and Breck exchanged glances, both recognizing the voice of the man Chun had just accused of treason. The timing was too convenient, Morrison's intervention too immediate after their discussion of his corruption. Either Chun was lying, or Morrison was desperately trying to silence the only witness to his betrayal. Chun watched Hartwell's face as he processed the conflicting orders. Two different commands from two different authorities, each claiming the other was compromised. For a military officer trained to follow clear chains of command, this kind of contradiction was a nightmare scenario that could end careers or cost lives. "Base control, this is Raven 7 requesting authentication codes for a board order," Hartwell transmitted, buying time while he tried to sort through the impossible situation. Standard protocol demanded verification when receiving contradictory commands, but Morrison's voice cut through before any response could arrive. "Raven 7, you have your orders directly from me. Authentication is unnecessary. Execute disposal immediately or face court-martial for insubordination." Morrison's tone carried the weight of absolute authority, but also an edge of desperation that trained soldiers could recognize. Breck was frantically working his tablet, trying to access Morrison's current status through military databases. "Sir, I can't get confirmation on Morrison's authorization level. The system shows his access as restricted pending investigation. That usually means someone's been relieved of command." Torres moved closer to the cargo controls, his position blocking easy access to the door release. "Commander, with respect, sir, we need to verify these orders through proper channels. Throwing someone out of an aircraft based on conflicting intelligence could make us accessories to murder." Chun remained silent, letting the situation develop naturally. These were good soldiers caught in an impossible position, and their military training was warring with their growing realization that something was fundamentally wrong with their mission. The truth would have to come from their own conclusions, not her words. The helicopter reached 20,000 feet, straining at the edge of its operational ceiling. The thin air and extreme altitude were affecting everyone except Chun, who seemed remarkably comfortable at an elevation that should have left her struggling for breath. Hartwell noticed her steady breathing and frowned. "Staff Sergeant, why aren't you showing any signs of altitude stress? Most people at this elevation experience shortness of breath, dizziness, or nausea. You look like you're sitting in a coffee shop at sea level." Chen allowed herself a small smile. Commander, have you ever wondered why my personnel file shows advanced paratrooper training but doesn't specify which programs I completed? Some military specializations require acclimatization to extreme conditions that go beyond standard airborne operations. Another transmission burst through the static. Raven 7, this is General Patterson, Base Commander. Colonel Morrison has been placed under arrest for treason. Do not, repeat, do not follow any orders from Morrison. Return Staff Sergeant Shun to base immediately for debriefing. Morrison's voice followed immediately, his desperation now obvious. Raven 7, General Patterson has been compromised by enemy intelligence. I am your legitimate commanding officer. Execute disposal now before enemy agents can extract classified information from a prisoner. Torres shook his head in disgust. Sir, this is getting ridiculous. Either Morrison's a traitor trying to cover his tracks, or half our command structure has been compromised by enemy agents. Either way, throwing an American soldier out of a helicopter without proper investigation is wrong. Breck looked up from his tablet, his face grave. Commander, I just accessed Morrison's current location through base security. He's not in his office or the command center. According to this, he's in a civilian vehicle heading toward the Pakistani border. That doesn't sound like someone with legitimate authority. The aircraft shuddered slightly as it reached maximum altitude, the engines straining to maintain elevation in the thin atmosphere. Chun felt the familiar sensation of her body automatically adjusting to extreme conditions, training that had been ingrained through hundreds of high-altitude operations. Hartwell stared at the cargo door controls, his hand trembling slightly. 20 years of military service had prepared him for combat, for command decisions under fire, for leading men in impossible situations. But nothing had prepared him for choosing between potentially treasonous orders while an innocent soldier's life hung in the balance. Chen's voice cut through his internal struggle, calm and steady despite the chaos surrounding them. Commander, you have all the information you need to make the right decision. The question is whether you're going to let fear of consequences prevent you from doing what you know is right. Outside the helicopter, the Afghan mountains stretched endlessly below, their peaks sharp and unforgiving. At 20,000 feet, the margin for error was non-existent. One wrong decision would haunt everyone aboard for the rest of their lives. The helicopter's warning systems began chiming as they pushed beyond safe operational limits. 20,500 feet and climbing, the aircraft straining against physics and engineering tolerances. Torres checked his instruments with growing concern, noting the temperature readings and engine performance indicators moving into dangerous territory. Hartwell keyed his radio one final time. Base control, this is Raven 7. Requesting immediate clarification on command authority. We have conflicting orders from Colonel Morrison and General Patterson regarding prisoner disposal. His voice carried the weight of a career soldier who knew this decision would define the rest of his military service. The response came through clearly, but it wasn't from base control. Raven 7, this is General Patterson. You are hereby ordered to ignore all transmissions from Morrison. He is no longer authorized to issue commands. Return immediately with Staff Sergeant Shun. She is now classified as a protected witness in a federal investigation. Morrison's voice burst through the static, his composure completely shattered. Hartwell, if you disobey my direct orders, I will personally ensure you spend the rest of your life in military prison. That woman knows classified information that could compromise national security. Execute disposal immediately. Breck was studying his tablet with intense concentration. Sir, I've accessed Morrison's travel logs. In the past 6 months, he's made 7 unauthorized trips to locations near known enemy strongholds. The pattern matches intelligence reports about information being sold to hostile forces. Shin watched the crew's faces as the pieces fell into place. These were professional soldiers trained to recognize patterns and assess threats. The evidence was becoming overwhelming that Morrison had been selling intelligence to enemy forces, and she was the only witness who could prove his betrayal. Torres moved decisively to the cargo door controls, engaging the safety locks. Commander, I'm securing this door until we receive verified orders through proper channels. Too many inconsistencies, too many conflicting authorities. We need to return to base and sort this out on the ground. The aircraft shuddered as wind shear hit at their extreme altitude. Through the porthole, Chan could see the curvature of the Earth, the deep blue of space beginning to show at the horizon. They were at the edge of breathable atmosphere, a place where survival required specialized training and equipment. Hartwell looked at Chun with new understanding. Staff Sergeant, what kind of training would prepare someone to remain conscious and alert at this altitude without supplemental oxygen? Because standard airborne school doesn't cover operations at 20,000 feet. Chin met his gaze steadily. Commander, some military programs exist that aren't listed in standard personnel files. Programs that prepare soldiers for operations in extreme environments where conventional equipment might not be available. Her calm breathing at altitude that should have incapacitated her was becoming impossible to ignore. A new voice crackled through the radio, crisp and authoritative. Raven 7, this is Secretary of Defense Williams. Colonel Morrison has been arrested for treason. Staff Sergeant Shun is under federal protection as a key witness. You are ordered to return her to base immediately. Any harm to her will be considered an act against national security. Morrison's final transmission was barely coherent. You don't understand what you're doing. She knows too much. She has to be eliminated before she can testify. The desperation in his voice confirmed everything Chan had told them about witnessing his betrayal. Breck looked up from his tablet, his expression grim. Sir, Morrison's financial records show payments totaling over $2 million from foreign accounts. The dates correspond exactly with major intelligence losses over the past year. He's been selling classified information to enemy forces. The helicopter's engines began showing signs of stress, the high altitude pushing them beyond safe operational parameters. Torres checked his instruments and shook his head. Commander, we need to descend immediately. We're at the edge of this aircraft's capabilities, and staying here much longer risks total engine failure. Chin remained remarkably composed as the aircraft struggled to maintain altitude. Her breathing stayed steady and controlled while the 3 crew members showed obvious signs of altitude stress. Breck was developing a headache, Torres was breathing heavily, and even Hartwell seemed affected by the thin air. Hartwell stared at Chun with growing realization. No standard military training would prepare someone for this altitude without equipment. Her calm demeanor, perfect breathing, and complete lack of altitude sickness suggested specialized training that went far beyond conventional airborne operations. You're not just a regular infantry soldier, are you? He asked, his voice carrying new respect. Chen's small smile confirmed what he was beginning to suspect. Whatever her real background, it involved training programs that most soldiers never knew existed. Torres began the descent procedure, the helicopter's engines relaxing as they dropped toward more sustainable altitude. As they descended, the crew's breathing became easier, but Chin showed no change whatsoever. Her steady composure at extreme elevation had revealed capabilities that went far beyond anything in her official personnel file. The radio transmitted one final message from General Patterson. Raven 7, excellent work maintaining operational security. Staff Sergeant Chin's testimony will be crucial in prosecuting Morrison and his network. Return to base immediately for full debriefing. Your actions today may have prevented significant damage to national security. Outside the helicopter, the Afghan landscape spread below them as they descended through layers of atmosphere toward a base where the truth about Operation Desert Falcon would finally be revealed. As the helicopter descended through 18,000 feet, the crew's breathing gradually returned to normal, but their attention remained fixed on Chun. Her complete lack of altitude symptoms had raised questions that demanded answers. Torres finished securing the cargo door and moved to check her restraints, though his purpose now seemed more protective than punitive. Commander, Torres said, studying the zip ties around Chen's wrists, these restraints show stress patterns consistent with controlled testing rather than panic responses. Someone with her apparent training would know exactly how much pressure to apply to maintain circulation while appearing helpless. Breck was cross-referencing Chin's personnel file with classified databases he'd been granted emergency access to. "Sir, I'm finding references to programs that aren't fully detailed in standard military records. Codenames like Ghost Protocol and High Angel Operations. The classification levels are way above my clearance." Chun allowed some of the tension to leave her shoulders as they descended to safer altitude. The immediate threat of being thrown from the aircraft without equipment was passing, but she remained cautious. These men were beginning to understand they'd been manipulated, but military conditioning ran deep, and orders were difficult to disobey even when logic suggested otherwise. Hartwell studied Chin's face, noting details he'd missed earlier. Her calm wasn't the resignation of someone facing death, but the steady composure of someone accustomed to extreme situations. The way she held herself, even restrained, suggested training in environments where panic could be fatal. "Staff Sergeant," he said, his tone shifting from authority to curiosity, "your breathing never changed during our climb to operational ceiling. Most people begin struggling around 15,000 feet without supplemental oxygen. You remain steady at 20,000 plus. That suggests acclimatization to extreme conditions." Chin met his gaze directly. "Commander, some military specializations require preparation for operations where conventional support isn't available. Situations where soldiers must rely entirely on their training and physical conditioning to complete missions that others would consider impossible." The radio crackled with another transmission from Base Control. "Raven 7, this is Colonel Hayes, Deputy Base Commander. We have confirmation that Morrison was arrested attempting to cross into Pakistan with classified documents." Staff Sergeant Chin's witness testimony was accurate. She observed him receiving payment for intelligence that led to the compromise of Operation Desert Falcon. Torres shook his head in disgust. "So we were sent to murder an innocent soldier to cover up Morrison's treason. Makes me sick to think how close we came to following through." He looked at Chun with newfound respect. "Ma'am, I apologize for the treatment you've received. We were fed lies by someone we trusted." Breck continued scrolling through the classified files he'd been granted access to. "Commander, there are references here to high-altitude operations training, extreme environment survival, and something called halo insertion without standard equipment. The details are redacted, but it sounds like specialized paratrooper training beyond anything I've heard of." The helicopter descended through 15,000 feet, entering more comfortable atmosphere. Chin's breathing remained unchanged, but now the crew understood why. Whatever programs she'd completed had prepared her for conditions that would incapacitate ordinary soldiers. Hartwell made a decision that would affect all their futures. "Sergeant Torres, remove Staff Sergeant Chin's restraints. She's not a prisoner. She's a witness who was nearly murdered to protect a traitor. The least we can do is treat her with the respect she's earned." Torres approached Chun with wire cutters, carefully removing the zip ties that had held her for the past 4 hours. As the restraints fell away, Chun rubbed her wrists briefly, then stretched her fingers. The circulation had remained perfect throughout her captivity, confirming their suspicions about her specialized knowledge. "Thank you, Commander," Chun said, her voice carrying genuine appreciation. "For what it's worth, you made the right choice under impossible circumstances. Not many officers would have questioned orders so thoroughly when faced with conflicting authorities." The helicopter continued its descent toward base, but the atmosphere inside had completely transformed. Instead of executioners carrying out a disposal mission, they were now protectors ensuring a key witness reached safety. The revelation of Morrison's betrayal had changed everything about their understanding of the situation. Breck looked up from his tablet, his expression thoughtful. "Ma'am, if you don't mind me asking, what exactly did you witness at the compound? Morrison's obviously desperate to prevent your testimony, but the specific details might help us understand the full scope of his betrayal." Chin considered her response carefully. I saw Morrison receive a briefcase containing what appeared to be operational plans and troop positions. The exchange happened with someone who definitely wasn't American military. 5 minutes later, our teams walked into a perfectly coordinated ambush that killed 7 good soldiers. The weight of that revelation settled over the crew. Morrison hadn't just sold intelligence. He directly caused American casualties by providing enemy forces with detailed information about their operations. Chin's testimony would be crucial in ensuring he faced justice for treason and murder. Torres checked his altimeter as they descended through 12,000 feet. Base control, this is Raven 7, requesting priority landing clearance for witness protection transport. We have Staff Sergeant Chun aboard and ready for immediate debriefing. Below them, the Afghan landscape gradually became more detailed as they approached safer altitude. The mountains and valleys that had seemed abstract from extreme elevation now showed the complex terrain where too many soldiers had died because of one man's greed and betrayal. At 10,000 feet, the helicopter systems finally relaxed into normal operational parameters. The crew's breathing had returned to baseline, but their minds were still processing the magnitude of what they'd almost done. Chun stretched her freed hands, working circulation back into fingers that had never actually lost feeling despite hours of restraints. Base Control transmitted updated landing instructions. Raven 7, you are cleared for priority landing on runway 2. Military police and intelligence officers will meet your aircraft. Staff Sergeant Chun is to be escorted directly to secure debriefing. Her testimony is now classified at the highest levels. Breck was still accessing classified files, his security clearance temporarily elevated for the emergency situation. Commander, I'm finding more details about Morrison's activities. Apparently, this wasn't his first betrayal. Intelligence suggests he's been selling information for over 18 months, responsible for multiple compromised operations. Torres checked his instruments and began final descent procedures. The familiar routine of landing preparation felt different now, knowing they were bringing home a witness whose testimony could expose a network of treason rather than disposing of evidence. Ma'am, he said to Chun, I have to ask, were you really unconscious when we first loaded you, or were you observing our behavior? Chun allowed herself a slight smile. Sergeant, when you're trained for hostile capture scenarios, you learn that appearing unconscious provides valuable intelligence about your captor's intentions and capabilities. I heard every word spoken during the flight, including your growing doubts about the mission. Hartwell shook his head in amazement. So you were evaluating us the entire time, determining whether we would follow through with Morrison's orders or recognize the inconsistencies. That's a level of tactical thinking that goes way beyond standard infantry training. The helicopter descended through 8,000 feet, approaching the familiar altitude of their mountain base. Below them, the landing pad was already surrounded by military vehicles and personnel. The urgency of the situation was evident in the number of high-ranking officers waiting for their arrival. Chun watched the preparations through the porthole window. Commander, I want you to know that your crew's questions and observations saved my life today. Lesser soldiers might have followed orders without questioning the contradictions. Your professionalism prevented a serious miscarriage of justice. Breck looked up from his tablet with a grim expression. Ma'am, according to these files, Morrison's betrayals resulted in the deaths of at least 23 American servicemen over the past year and a half. Your testimony isn't just about one operation. It's about a pattern of treason that's been ongoing for months. The weight of that information settled over everyone in the aircraft. Morrison hadn't just made one bad decision or been corrupted by a single payoff. He'd been systematically selling American lives to enemy forces for over a year, and Chun was the first witness who could provide direct evidence of his betrayal. Torres initiated final landing approach, the helicopter's familiar vibration changing as they prepared to touch down. Base Control, this is Raven 7 on final approach, requesting confirmation that witness protection protocols are in place for Staff Sergeant Chun. Confirmed, Raven 7. Full protection detail is standing by. Additionally, All 3 crew members are requested for immediate debriefing regarding your observations of the conflicting orders and Morrison's behavior. Your testimony may be crucial in identifying other compromised personnel. Chin realized that Hartwell, Breck, and Torres had unknowingly become key witnesses themselves. Their documentation of Morrison's desperate attempts to override legitimate orders would provide crucial evidence about his state of mind and awareness of his exposure. The helicopter descended through 5,000 feet, the base facilities becoming clearly visible below. Chung could see the unusual level of activity surrounding the landing pad, with more personnel present than would normally greet a routine transport. Word of Morrison's arrest and the investigation had clearly spread through the command structure. Hartwell turned to face Chin directly. "Staff Sergeant, before we land, I need to ask something that's been bothering me. Your composure at extreme altitude, your tactical awareness during restraint, your calm evaluation of our behavior. What kind of specialized training did you really complete?" Chin considered her response carefully, knowing that some details would remain classified even after this crisis. "Commander, let's just say that some military operations require personnel who can function effectively in environments and situations where conventional support isn't available. Situations where survival depends entirely on individual capability and training." The helicopter touched down with a gentle bump, engines winding down as ground crew secured the aircraft. Through the windows, Chun could see military police forming a protective perimeter while intelligence officers approached the helicopter. The investigation into Morrison's network was clearly a priority operation. Torres opened the crew door, allowing the sound of activity on a landing pad to filter into the aircraft. "Ma'am," he said to Chun, "it's been an honor serving with you today, even under these circumstances. Your strength and composure throughout this ordeal has been remarkable." Chin stood and moved toward the door, her movements fluid and controlled despite hours of restraint. The specialized training that had kept her calm at 20,000 feet was evident in every gesture, suggesting capabilities that extended far beyond what any of them had initially understood. Outside, a colonel in dress uniform waited with a security detail. The expression on his face suggested that Chin's safe return was just the beginning of a much larger investigation that would reshape their understanding of how deeply Morrison's betrayal had penetrated their operations. As the helicopter's rotors wound down, Chin stepped onto the landing pad with fluid grace that belied her hours in restraints. The waiting colonel approached immediately, his bearing suggesting both relief and urgency. "Staff Sergeant Chun, I'm Colonel Hayes, Deputy Base Commander. Thank God you're safe. We need to get you to secure debriefing immediately." Behind Hayes, Chin noted the unusual security arrangements. Instead of standard military police, the perimeter was staffed by personnel she recognized as specialized counterintelligence operatives. The level of protection suggested this investigation extended far beyond Morrison's individual betrayal. Hartwell, Breck, and Torres disembarked behind Chun, their expressions still processing the magnitude of what they'd nearly done. Hayes addressed them directly. "Commander Hartwell, your crew's actions today prevented a serious breach of justice. Your questioning of conflicting orders and refusal to follow through with unauthorized disposal likely saved this entire investigation." An intelligence officer approached with a classified briefing folder. "Colonel Hayes, we have updates on Morrison's network. His arrest triggered coordinated raids at 7 locations. We've recovered evidence of systematic intelligence sales dating back 2 years, far more extensive than initially suspected." Chin observed the activity around them with professional interest. The rapid response and coordination suggested this investigation had been developing for some time before Morrison's exposure. Her witnessing his final payoff had likely provided the last piece of evidence needed to move against his entire network. Hayes gestured toward a convoy of armored vehicles waiting near the landing pad. "Staff Sergeant, these vehicles will transport you to secure facilities for debriefing. Your testimony about Morrison's activities will be crucial but we also need details about any other personnel you may have observed acting suspiciously. As they walked toward the convoy, Breck approached Chun with his tablet. "Ma'am, before you go into classified debriefing, I wanted to show you something. The files I accessed during the flight contained references to your previous deployments. You've been involved in significantly more high-level operations than your standard personnel record indicates." Chin glanced at the screen, noting the partial information Breck had uncovered. "Some of those operations remain classified, Sergeant. What you're seeing represents only the portions that can be documented in standard military databases. The full scope of certain assignments must remain protected." Torres stepped forward, extending his hand respectfully. "Ma'am, I just wanted to say that serving alongside you today, even under these circumstances, has been an education. Your composure and tactical awareness throughout this ordeal has been remarkable. I'm proud we made the right choice." The convoy prepared to depart, but Hayes paused to address Hartwell's crew directly. "Gentlemen, your observations during this flight will be crucial evidence in prosecuting Morrison and his associates. Your documentation of his desperate attempts to override legitimate orders provides insight into his awareness of exposure and fear of consequences." Chun turned back to face the three men who had ultimately chosen to protect rather than harm her. "Commander Hartwell, Sergeant Torres, Major Breck, your questions and observations saved more than just my life today. Your refusal to blindly follow orders prevented this investigation from being derailed." An encrypted radio transmission interrupted their farewell. Colonel Hayes received the message, and his expression grew more serious. "Staff Sergeant Chun, we just received intelligence that Morrison's network included personnel at multiple bases. Your testimony may help identify collaborators who are still in position to cause damage." The armored convoy engines started, their heavy diesel rumble indicating the urgency of moving Chun to secure facilities. Hayes gestured toward the lead vehicle. "Ma'am, we need to move immediately. The longer you remain exposed, the greater the risk that remaining network members might attempt to silence you." Chun nodded and moved toward the convoy, but paused to look back at the helicopter crew one final time. What happened today demonstrates the difference between following orders and serving justice. You chose justice, and that choice will save American lives. As she approached the armored vehicle, Chin's movements remained fluid and controlled despite the stress of the past hours. The specialized training that had kept her calm at extreme altitude was evident in her professional bearing and tactical awareness of the security arrangements around her. Hayes opened the vehicle door personally, his respect for Chun evident in his careful attention to her safety. "Staff Sergeant, once we reach secure facilities, you'll be debriefed by senior intelligence officers and federal investigators. Your testimony will likely result in one of the largest prosecutions for military treason in recent history." The convoy prepared to depart, leaving Hartwell, Breck, and Torres standing near their helicopter. They watched the armored vehicles pull away, carrying a woman whose true capabilities they were only beginning to understand. Their decision to question orders and protect an innocent soldier had prevented a catastrophic miscarriage of justice. Behind them, base personnel continued coordinating the expanded investigation into Morrison's network. The evidence Chun would provide would expose a betrayal that had cost dozens of American lives, and her survival would ensure that justice could finally be served. The helicopter sat silent on the landing pad, its mission transformed from instrument of murder to vessel of salvation through the moral courage of three soldiers who chose to think rather than simply obey. The armored convoy moved through the base with military precision, but Chin noticed details that suggested this was no routine transport. The escort vehicles carried personnel equipped with advanced communications gear and weapons configurations she recognized from specialized counterterrorism units. This level of protection indicated threats beyond what Morrison alone could pose. Colonel Hayes sat across from Chun in the lead vehicle, studying a classified tablet with increasing concern. "Staff Sergeant, we've intercepted communications suggesting Morrison's network received advance warning about your survival. There may be attempts to prevent your testimony through direct action rather than official channels. Chun absorbed this information with the same calm she'd maintained throughout the helicopter ordeal. Sir, if Morrison's associates are willing to risk direct action against a protected witness, it suggests their network includes personnel with significant resources and operational capability. This investigation may be more complex than initially assessed. The convoy approached a secure facility that Chun recognized as typically reserved for the highest levels of classified operations. The building's architecture and defensive positions indicated preparation for scenarios involving potential hostile action against critical assets. Her testimony had clearly been classified at levels requiring extraordinary protection. Hayes received another encrypted transmission, his expression growing more grave. We've identified at least 3 other officers who received irregular payments matching Morrison's financial patterns. The scope of this betrayal extends through multiple command levels. Your direct observation of Morrison's payoff may be the key evidence that brings down the entire network. As they entered the secure facility, Chun noted the personnel manning security positions. These weren't standard military police, but specialists she recognized from joint operations involving multiple intelligence agencies. The level of federal involvement suggested Morrison's betrayal had compromised operations extending far beyond their base. A federal agent approached as they exited the vehicle, his credentials identifying him as Senior Counterintelligence. Staff Sergeant Chun, I'm Agent Morrison, no relation to the suspect. We appreciate your survival and willingness to testify. Your observations may prevent future American casualties and expose foreign intelligence operations. Chun followed Agent Morrison through multiple security checkpoints, each requiring different authentication protocols. The elaborate security measures confirmed what she'd suspected during the helicopter flight. Morrison's betrayal wasn't isolated criminal activity, but part of a systematic intelligence operation targeting American military operations. The debriefing room was equipped with recording equipment and secure communications links that suggested her testimony would be transmitted directly to federal prosecutors and intelligence agencies. Chun recognized the setup from previous classified operations, though she couldn't discuss those experiences without additional security clearances. Agent Morrison activated the recording system and began the formal debriefing. Staff Sergeant Chun, please describe in detail your observations of Colonel Morrison's activities at the compound during Operation Desert Falcon. Include any conversations you overheard and the exact sequence of events leading to the ambush. Chun provided precise testimony about Morrison's meeting with an unidentified individual, the exchange of documents and payment, and the timing relative to the subsequent ambush. Her military training and observation and reporting ensured every detail was accurate and could withstand cross-examination in future legal proceedings. During her testimony, Agent Morrison occasionally paused to verify details through encrypted communications with other investigators. The coordination suggested simultaneous operations were proceeding based on Chen's information, likely targeting other members of Morrison's network before they could escape or destroy evidence. As the debriefing continued, Chen realized her survival had prevented more than just her own murder. Morrison's network had clearly planned to eliminate the only witness who could provide direct evidence of their betrayal, allowing them to continue selling American lives to enemy forces indefinitely. Agent Morrison concluded the initial session after 2 hours of detailed testimony. Staff Sergeant, your observations provide crucial evidence for prosecuting not just Morrison, but potentially a dozen other compromised personnel. Your courage in surviving today has likely saved countless American lives. Chun was escorted to secure quarters within the facility, where she would remain under protection until the full scope of Morrison's network could be dismantled. Through the reinforced windows, she could see additional security personnel taking positions around the building perimeter. The facility's communication systems buzzed with encrypted traffic as investigators coordinated raids and arrests based on Chen's testimony. The evidence she provided was already being used to dismantle a betrayal that had cost American lives for nearly 2 years. Meanwhile, back at the helicopter landing pad, Hartwell, Breck, and Torres were being debriefed by military investigators about their observations during the flight. Their documentation of Morrison's desperate attempts to override legitimate orders provided additional evidence of his guilt and awareness of exposure. The 3 crew members' decision to question conflicting orders rather than blindly follow commands had prevented the elimination of a key witness and allowed justice to proceed. Their moral courage in an impossible situation had transformed them from potential accomplices to heroes who helped expose systematic treason. As evening approached, the investigation continued expanding. Chin's testimony had triggered the largest counterintelligence operation in recent military history, with raids proceeding at multiple locations to arrest Morrison's associates before they could flee or destroy evidence. Her survival had ensured that justice could finally be served for the American soldiers who had died because of their betrayal. 3 days after the helicopter incident, Agent Morrison entered Chin's secure quarters with updates that would reshape their understanding of the entire investigation. Staff Sergeant, we've completed raids based on your testimony. The scope of betrayal was even larger than we initially suspected. Morrison's network included personnel at 7 different bases across 3 countries. Chun set down the classified briefing materials she'd been reviewing and gave Agent Morrison her full attention. The magnitude of the conspiracy was staggering, but explained the desperate measures taken to silence her testimony. How many American casualties resulted from their activities? 53 confirmed deaths, Agent Morrison replied grimly, plus an unknown number of compromised operations that may have resulted in additional casualties we can't directly link to their intelligence sales. Your survival and testimony prevented this network from continuing indefinitely. The secure facility's communication systems had been active around the clock as investigators coordinated arrests and evidence collection. Through her reinforced windows, Chun could see the constant movement of personnel as the investigation expanded into one of the largest counterintelligence operations in military history. Agent Morrison activated his tablet and showed Chin photographs of the arrested conspirators. We've apprehended 12 individuals so far, including 2 generals and several field-grade officers. The evidence you provided was crucial in obtaining warrants and coordinating simultaneous arrests before they could flee or destroy evidence. Chun studied the faces on the screen, recognizing several officers from previous operations. The realization that she'd unknowingly served alongside traitors who were selling American lives to enemy forces was deeply disturbing. How long had this network been operational without detection? Our forensic accounting suggests at least 3 years, possibly longer. Morrison wasn't the leader, just a mid-level coordinator. The real architects were General Blackwood and Colonel Stevens, both of whom had access to the highest levels of operational planning. They used Morrison and others to implement their intelligence sales while maintaining plausible deniability. The tablet displayed financial records showing millions of dollars in payments to the conspirators over multiple years. The systematic nature of their betrayal was evident in the careful documentation and regular payment schedules that treated American military intelligence like a commodity to be sold to the highest bidder. Chun absorbed the magnitude of the betrayal with professional composure, but internally she felt the weight of knowing that dozens of American soldiers had died because of systematic treason by their own officers. Your evidence suggests this network had advanced knowledge of most major operations in this theater? Agent Morrison nodded grimly. They were selling operational plans, troop movements, equipment capabilities, and even individual soldier profiles to multiple enemy organizations. Your observation of Morrison's final payoff provided the smoking gun evidence we needed to prosecute the entire network. A secure communication terminal chimed with an incoming transmission. Agent Morrison answered and spoke briefly before turning back to Chun. Staff Sergeant, that was the Attorney General's office. Your testimony will be required for congressional hearings in addition to criminal proceedings. This case will likely result in significant changes to military security protocols. Chun realized her survival had implications extending far beyond prosecuting individual traitors. The systematic nature of the betrayal would require fundamental changes to how classified information was protected and how personnel were vetted for sensitive positions. The scope of required testimony and hearings meant Chun would remain under federal protection for months while legal proceedings unfolded. Her quarters in the secure facility would become her home until every member of the network faced justice for their betrayal of American soldiers and national security. Agent Morrison prepared to leave, but paused at the door. "Staff Sergeant, you should know that Commander Hartwell, Major Breck, and Sergeant Torres have been commended for their actions during your helicopter flight. Their refusal to follow Morrison's orders and their documentation of his behavior provided crucial corroborating evidence." Chun felt genuine satisfaction knowing the three men who'd saved her life were being recognized for their moral courage. Their decision to question orders rather than blindly obey had prevented her murder and preserved the testimony needed to expose systematic treason. As Agent Morrison departed, Chun returned to studying the classified materials about the investigation. The evidence collected from raids and arrests painted a picture of betrayal so extensive that it would take years to fully assess the damage to American operations and personnel. Outside her window, Chun could see additional security personnel taking positions as threats against potential witnesses continued to develop. Several members of Morrison's network remained at large, and foreign intelligence services might attempt to silence witnesses who could expose their American sources. The secure facilities systems continued processing evidence and coordinating with prosecutors preparing cases against the arrested conspirators. Chin's testimony would be the cornerstone of prosecutions that could result in multiple death sentences for treason during wartime. Her survival during the helicopter incident had prevented the elimination of the key witness needed to expose systematic betrayal that cost American lives for years. The moral courage of three helicopter crew members had ensured that justice could proceed against traitors who had sold their country's secrets for personal profit. 2 weeks after the initial arrests, Chun was transported under heavy security to a federal courthouse where the first phase of legal proceedings would begin. The convoy route had been planned with multiple contingencies, as intelligence suggested Morrison's foreign contacts might attempt to eliminate key witnesses before they could testify in open court. In the secure vehicle, Agent Morrison briefed Chun on the courtroom security arrangements. "Staff Sergeant, we've identified credible threats against your life from foreign intelligence services whose operations you'll be exposing. The courthouse has been secured with counterterrorism protocols typically reserved for the highest profile national security cases." Chun observed the extensive security measures as they approached the federal building. Rooftop snipers, bomb detection teams, and multiple perimeter checkpoints indicated the government was taking no chances with witness protection. The level of preparation suggested her testimony would reveal information that foreign powers desperately wanted to suppress. Inside the courthouse, Chun was escorted through private corridors to avoid public areas where potential threats might be positioned. The courtroom itself had been modified with bulletproof glass barriers and enhanced security monitoring that transformed the legal proceeding into a fortress-like environment. Federal Prosecutor Williams approached Chun before the hearing began. "Staff Sergeant, your testimony today will focus on your direct observations of Morrison's activities. We'll be presenting evidence about the broader network, but your eyewitness account provides the foundation for our entire case against systematic military treason." Chun entered the courtroom and immediately noticed the defendant's section, where Morrison sat alongside 11 other officers who'd been arrested based on her testimony. Their faces showed mixtures of resignation, anger, and fear as they realized their years of betrayal were finally being exposed in public proceedings. The judge called the court to order, and Prosecutor Williams began presenting the government's case. "Your Honor, the evidence will show that these defendants systematically sold American military intelligence to foreign powers for over 3 years, resulting in the deaths of 53 American servicemen and the compromise of countless operations. Chin was called to testify, and as she approached the witness stand, she felt the weight of representing not just her own survival, but the memory of every soldier who died because of the defendant's betrayal. Her testimony would give voice to those who could no longer speak for themselves. Under oath, Chun provided detailed testimony about witnessing Morrison's final intelligence exchange at the compound. I observed Colonel Morrison receive a briefcase from an unidentified individual approximately 5 minutes before our units were ambushed. The timing and coordination suggested the ambush was planned using information Morrison had just provided. Defense attorneys attempted to challenge Chin's observations, but her military training in reconnaissance and reporting made her testimony unshakable. Every detail was precise, every timeline accurate, and her professional credibility was beyond question. Prosecutor Williams presented financial evidence showing millions of dollars in payments to the defendants over multiple years. Staff Sergeant Chin's testimony provides the direct observation of intelligence transfer that connects these financial transactions to actual operational betrayals that cost American lives. During cross-examination, Morrison's attorney attempted to discredit Chin's account by suggesting she was unconscious or disoriented during the compound incident. Chin's calm, detailed responses demonstrated her complete awareness and professional competence as an observer. The defense strategy crumbled when Chun was asked about her specialized training. While she couldn't discuss classified programs, her responses made clear that her observational capabilities and stress management were far beyond standard infantry preparation. As Chin's testimony concluded, the courtroom atmosphere had shifted dramatically. The defendants' faces showed the realization that their conspiracy had been thoroughly exposed by a witness whose credibility and competence were unassailable. Judge Harrison addressed the court after Chin stepped down. The witness's testimony provides compelling evidence of systematic betrayal that demands the full accountability of our justice system. These proceedings will continue until every aspect of this conspiracy has been thoroughly examined. Chun was escorted from the courtroom under continued security protection, knowing her testimony had provided the foundation for prosecutions that would likely result in multiple death sentences for treason. The evidence she preserved through her survival would ensure that justice was served for the American soldiers who died because of systematic betrayal. Outside the courthouse, Agent Morrison confirmed that Chin's testimony had exceeded expectations. Staff Sergeant, your account was so detailed and credible that several defendants are already negotiating plea agreements. Your courage in surviving the helicopter incident and testifying today has ensured that justice will be served. The convoy departed the courthouse with Chun under continued protection, but the first phase of legal accountability had been established. Her direct observations of Morrison's betrayal, combined with the financial evidence and coordinated arrests, had created an unbreakable case against the entire conspiracy. As they returned to the secure facility, Chun reflected on the significance of her survival and testimony. The helicopter crew's decision to question orders rather than blindly obey had preserved the evidence needed to expose systematic treason and prevent future American casualties from similar betrayals. 6 months after the helicopter incident, Chin stood before a joint session of Congress delivering testimony that would reshape American military security protocols forever. The same composure that had sustained her at 20,000 feet without a parachute now commanded the attention of senators and representatives as she detailed the systematic betrayal that had cost dozens of American lives. The congressional hearing room was packed with military officials, intelligence personnel, and family members of soldiers who had died because of the conspiracy Chin's survival had exposed. Her testimony represented not just her own experience, but justice for every American who had paid the ultimate price for their countrymen's greed. Senator Richardson, chairman of the Armed Services Committee, addressed Chun directly. Staff Sergeant, your courage in surviving an attempted murder and providing testimony that exposed this conspiracy has prevented countless future casualties. How do you recommend we prevent similar betrayals in the future? Chin's response reflected months of reflection on the systematic failures that had allowed the conspiracy to operate undetected for years. Senator, the key lesson is that moral courage at every level of command is essential. Commander Hartwell, Major Breck, and Sergeant Torres demonstrated that questioning orders when evidence suggests wrongdoing can prevent catastrophic injustices. The hearing room erupted in applause as Chun acknowledged the helicopter crew whose decision to protect rather than harm her had made justice possible. Their transformation from potential executioners to heroes embodied the best traditions of American military service when faced with impossible moral choices. Representative Martinez asked about the specialized training that had enabled Chin's survival during the helicopter incident. While respecting classification requirements, Chin's response made clear that American military capabilities extended far beyond what enemies might expect, serving as both explanation and strategic deterrent. The final phase of criminal proceedings had concluded the previous week with sentences that reflected the severity of systematic treason. Morrison received life imprisonment, while Generals Blackwood and Stevens faced execution for their leadership roles in selling American lives to foreign powers. After the congressional hearing, Chin was approached by General Patterson, who had been promoted to oversee the implementation of new security protocols based on lessons learned from the conspiracy. Staff Sergeant, your actions have resulted in the most comprehensive reform of military intelligence security in decades. The reforms included enhanced vetting procedures, improved oversight of personnel with access to classified information, and new protocols requiring multiple authorizations for sensitive operations. Chin's experience had demonstrated how individual moral courage could prevent systematic institutional failures. Later that evening, Chin attended a private ceremony honoring the helicopter crew who had saved her life. Commander Hartwell, now promoted to lieutenant colonel, approached her with obvious emotion. Staff Sergeant, I want you to know that our decision to question those orders was the most important choice any of us have ever made. Major Breck, promoted to lieutenant colonel, expressed similar sentiments. Ma'am, your composure during that flight gave us the time and confidence to recognize the inconsistencies in our orders. Your professional bearing under extreme stress probably saved all our careers and certainly saved your life. Sergeant Torres, now promoted to Staff Sergeant, was more direct in his appreciation. Ma'am, flying with you that day taught me that following orders and serving justice aren't always the same thing. Your example of grace under pressure will influence how I approach leadership for the rest of my career. The ceremony concluded with presentations of medals recognizing both Chin's courage as a witness and the crew's moral leadership in protecting her. Their story had become required study material at military leadership schools, demonstrating how individual decisions could have far-reaching consequences for national security. As the evening ended, Chin reflected on how a moment of witnessing betrayal had led to systematic reforms that would protect future generations of American soldiers. Her survival during the helicopter incident had been just the beginning of a journey that exposed institutional failures and resulted in meaningful change. The helicopter that was supposed to be her execution chamber had instead become the setting for moral courage that saved countless American lives. 3 professional soldiers had chosen to think rather than simply obey, and their decision had preserved the testimony needed to expose years of systematic treason. If this story of hidden strength and moral courage moved you, drop a comment about what resonated most with you, or share if you've witnessed similar acts of bravery in your own experience. Sometimes the most important battles are fought not with weapons, but with the courage to do what's right when everything seems wrong. Chin's legacy extended beyond her individual survival to encompass fundamental changes in how American military personnel were trained to recognize and respond to moral challenges. Her experience proved that individual courage, supported by institutional integrity, could overcome even the most systematic betrayals of trust and duty.